Hi, everyone. Welcome to Noodling with Neurodiversity Coaching Academy. I am Tracy Winter, one of the co-founders of Neurodiversity Coaching Academy. And with me is my co-co-founder, Kate Arms.
Yes. Hi.
Hi, Kate. And with us today is Heidi Schaefer, who will be joining us to ask us some interesting questions that she has brought. Heidi, feel free to introduce yourself to the crew.
Okay, great. Thanks. Nice to be here. Thanks for asking me to join you in this conversation. I'm really looking forward to it. So who am I? I'm a one-to-one coach and a many-to-one coach in a process called action learning, which I've done for the last sort of 20 years. I have a lot of the attributes associated with ADHD, executive function problems, endless curiosity, moving from one thing to the other, poor short-term memory. And I've also discovered last month that I have aphantasia, which means I have no mind's eye. And so now I understand why all those visualizations in coaching have been so hard for me, and why I keep thinking of everything in sort of conceptual, abstract ways. Yeah, I've been coaching for about one-to-one coaching for about 2 or 3 years. I have an ACC. I have a varied background in lots of careers, experiential outdoor education, management, small business director, research scientist, mountain guide, typical ADHD behavior. Yeah, that's probably enough about me for the moment, really.
What I love about your background is that it's such a wonderful demonstration of the panic that comes on my eyes if somebody says non-contextual, so tell me about yourself.
I said
For
to
sure.
Kate the other day, I said, if your LinkedIn looks like a pinball machine, like mine does, chances are you're gonna want to come hang out with us. That's what we do.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Yeah, so why don't you kick us off? What are you interested in sort of starting this conversation from?
Okay, so I want us to explore. I want us to think about, or I'm interested in talking about the setting of goals, and because it's a big thing in coaching. I've had clients where I've said, where would you like to be by the end of this session, or whatever else, and they'll go, I don't know. We'll work it out when, we'll work it out as we go along. So I've had to kind of adjust that question so that we're all kind of on the same page. I find it very hard as a question. I find it very hard not only to set goals in my own personal life, but also to move towards them and achieve them. And I've always thought, ever since I discovered, that I have, ADHD, that was an aha moment for me. And I thought, okay, yeah, I can understand why I have trouble getting there. And in the last month or so, I've realized I have aphantasia, and I thought, oh, I wonder if that plays into it as well. I wonder, the idea that I can think things conceptually. I can create ideas and patterns and concepts till the cows come home, but turning them into something concrete for me to work towards, let alone the executive function things, is actually really, really hard. So I guess my question is, what does it mean to visualize a goal? What does it mean to visualize a goal? Is it a picture? Is it an idea? How do we embody that and make that concrete? And that's true for my clients. That's true for any of us. But if it's hard for you to make that concrete, or if it's hard, like, how does that work? So that's my question.
Yeah, what a great question. So Tracy, I sort of want to get your sort of sense on sort of how you want to play at this. And so full disclosure to everybody listening, I also have the characteristics of ADHD and aphantasia. So this is living
Right, okay.
in my space.
Mhm.
Tracy has the ADHD, but not the aphantasia. And so I'm super curious about sort of what Tracy's curiosities are, specifically on this topic. And then I've got lots of ideas because I have lots of experience.
Well, and I'm super curious to know what Kate's, all those ideas and things and experience there, because everyone can use this help. So the first thing that hopped up for me as you were talking is, especially with my ADHD clients, I don't use the word goals.
Mhm.
I would venture to say I never or hardly ever do. I'm really careful about it because we have set goals so many times. This is true for other kinds of neurodivergence. We've set goals so many times, tried to reach them in the typical ways, of course, not been able to do it because that doesn't work with the way our brain works, and failed. So the word goal gets kind of loaded. Goal and homework, those two things really loaded for this population. So I just leave them out of my vocabulary. I asked the question that you liked, that you mentioned. I'll say, so where would you like to be at the end of this engagement? Or what changes would you like to see by the end of this engagement? And then I don't necessarily hold them to it. Same thing within a session. Sometimes I'll ask, where do you want to be by the end? And if any of my coaching students are listening, you should definitely ask, where do you want to end the session? Because that's sort of how we start out. And there's some mucking around that happens on the way through. So even like when I do ask that question, my clients do set a goal at the beginning, or set, here's where I want to end up. Oftentimes it moves because we're coming to new awareness as part of the coaching, right? We have new awareness, we have new perspective. So what we want is going to morph. So as long as we're following the client's agenda. Now to the aphantasia part, that's an interesting question. And I'm not sure that I totally, I don't have the experience, so I don't feel like I have the full answer. I will say, when I ask the question about where do you want to be, I envision that myself. And I do avoid asking people to envision stuff for exactly this reason, because I know this is something that co-occurs in the neurodivergent population quite a lot. So I don't expect that of people. I don't take them on sort of like guided journeys of go to your happy place type stuff for exactly this reason. But I am actually really interested to hear from both of you on like, how does this work for you? Because I don't think that I have a answer that I'm confident in. Is that fair to say? I hope. So
I love your transparency. Yeah, like I love your transparency about that, because I think it's really, really valuable for the people who don't have this lack of a mind's eye as their lived experience to know that simply by just not using Envision and by looking for alternatives to guided visualization, there is a way of working. Because I think it's really important, because this is a substantial, but like it's a minority of the population, but it is a substantial portion of the population, and it is a really difficult place to be. If you can't articulate, this is what I expect it to look like when I get to my goal, how am I going to write a SMART goal? How am I going to make a vision board? How am I going to do any of those really specific things? So I learned to work with my own goal setting difficulties. Firstly, the hard way, by sort of taking things that other people said I would be good at and said, like, you should do this, and trying them on and realizing they didn't work, and then doing the jump ship and do something completely different because I didn't know what else to do piece. And that's a very hard and long and painful way of discovering the things. I'm not sure that the shorter, faster, kinder, gentler way actually looks all that different in a lot of cases. Because the actual figuring out what it looks like concretely actually requires trying it on a little bit. And so there is actually a bit of internships and volunteer experience and trying on a career and doing some classes that is actually a really important part of educating the way that we understand things. because it's that piece of, I can't put the picture together quite enough to actually get a sense of, does that feel good? Does that feel right? It's just, that gap doesn't work quite so well. So 2 pieces of advice that I was given from coaches during my coach training that really helped me. One was when there was a guided visualization exercise as part of the training, my instructor said, and for those of you who don't visualize well or very clearly, I invite you to hold this lightly, like listen to the exercise, let yourself come into a settled place. Don't worry about whether you see anything or not, and see whether you learn anything anyway. And that invitation to participate and to be okay about not actually being able to follow the instructions. What was actually really interesting was at the end of that, with the debrief questions, I was like, I went through an experience and there are some things that I can pull out of it. Like, I think it was a go and sort of somebody gives you a gift kind of thing and like open up the gift. And the idea was that it was a symbolic gift about something from the future. And I was like, I have no idea. And also, I have this sense that it was shiny and colorful. And then I had a bit of a metaphor that I could start to work with. So it was a little bit of something, but I had no visual experience of it. So that invitation was one piece that was really useful. The other thing that I found really useful early on in my coach training was one of my coach mentors said, when people have concrete goals, what they are describing is their current self's best guess about what will make them feel about their lives the way that they want to feel. And your goal is not actually, your goal as a coach is not actually to help them get those concrete goals. Your goal is actually to help them feel the way they want to feel. And so I was like, okay, so I can skip that part in the middle if I can figure out how I want to feel. And I found that really useful.
That's cool.
Yeah, so that was really cool. And so what I've actually discovered is that that way of living is very different, because it means that in a moment I'm going, does that feel like it's going in the right direction of that feeling? Is my sense that on the other side of this difficult thing, there's that feeling? Or is my sense that I should just do the thing that feels good right now? Because the ADHD qualities piece wants to do only the thing that feels good right now. And so sometimes there's that piece of like, okay, what's the hard thing that is between me and the thing, the way I really want to feel? Yeah, go ahead, Tracy.
Well, just adding on the ADHD piece, something that occurred to me while you were talking, less on the aphantasia side, but in the ADHD side, the other challenge with goal setting is for ADHDers, we joke that we have now and we have not now, right? So if it's not now, it's not now, and that's sort of out here somewhere, right? That could mean in the next 5 minutes, or it could mean in the next 5 years. And part of that is the challenge that a lot of neurodivergent folks have with time agnosia, which we used to call time blindness, right? Of not having a sense of time passing, or what you can fit in time passing, or what's a reasonable, right? All of that stuff. So all of those are extra challenges as well, I think, to help us. So like, I think Kate mentioned SMART goals. I don't do SMART goals with my clients unless they ask me for them. First of all, I'm bad at them. Second of all, like it doesn't, it's too concrete, like he was saying. Like, and to me, it's staying at the behavioral level too, right? A SMART goal helps you change your behavior. And what we're doing, hopefully as coaches, is changing awareness, growing awareness, changing perspectives, doing that, from which the behavior kind of like falls out, as I say to my producer. You stay invoking awareness long enough, the action steps will fall out. It'll just be obvious, So all of that, the now, not now, I think is really a challenge for ADHDers, because like, and as we become older, I think too, we grow an awareness of like, well, when I set goals, that's not where I end up. So should I be like, does that even make sense to do? Or do I just like flow? You know, so
Yeah.
like all of that I think comes together, and then you add the aphantasia, and it's another layer of complexity.
Yeah, I think the now, not now is like, and when it's an idea, you know, when it's some concept, like I would like to, I don't know. Well, I mean, even when it feels like an idea, when it doesn't feel concrete, like, you know, I'm an artist, I'd like to have some exhibitions, you know, like that's an idea. But and in a sense, it's, you know, it can be framed concretely, you know, there will be my work in a gallery, whatever. But the trajectory to get there, right? The steps, you know, to feel that experience and to move towards that, the now, not now, just wreaks havoc with that, you know, because it is a, you know, very long-term thing.
And I think part of my role as a coach is to help people get there. Like I'm
Yeah.
pretty good about doing it for myself, but
Mm.
with other people,
Yeah.
it's helping break down what are those steps, or even just at the end, as you know, as they're coming out, here's what I'd like to experiment with.
Mm.
Like that's when I get a little pedantic, and I'm like, okay, when are you going to do it? What's the backup time you're going to do it?
Mm.
How are you capturing this? How will you
Mm.
remember this? Right?
That's
So
right.
like that's the ways that I take them concrete,
Mm.
but not until they've
That's
done
right.
this other work first. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And that's where coaching is really great, because you don't need to be able to do it yourself. You need to be able to ask the questions, and not being able to do it yourself provides a degree of empathy and compassion and whatever else. But you need, it puts you in a place where you can start to ask the questions that might be helpful in that way.
And then our clients learn to ask themselves those questions, so
That's
that we're
right.
with them
That's right.
anymore. They're still doing that.
Yeah, and it's one of the interesting gifts of not being very good at those details sort of for myself, that actually it helps everybody if my client starts building the skills of being responsible for that for themselves earlier. So actually my natural instinct as a coach is to try and get them to take more responsibility for that than they're
Yeah,
comfortable
that's
with
true.
earlier. So it's one of the ways that I challenge my clients is to actually hold themselves accountable rather than relying on me to hold them accountable. And so it's actually kind of a gift. It doesn't always feel like a gift to the clients in the moment. And I think it's important that we like honor that. And so sometimes there's this negotiation of, okay, I'm going to do this for you for now, but just so you know, like the goal is for you to be able to do this for yourself. And so that I think is really powerful. And I think that the other thing that is here that is really, really valuable is we can help people with things that we need help with ourselves if they're the right sorts of things. This piece of if there's a conceptual goal, I mean, I want a gallery show, like that's a conceptual goal. And that piece of what can I do today that moves me closer to that goal? Sometimes that's powerful enough if the goal is strong enough. And what usually comes up in that space, if you can't visualize the steps, is this sort of sense of, I have to take it on faith that I'm moving in the right direction. And so it takes a lot of courage to step into that uncertainty and sort of go, okay, because you're building the staircase as you're climbing the tower, right? It's not even just like a flight of stairs. It's like several stories worth of tower that you're building the stairs as you go. And so that's another thing I find that as a coach is really powerful to do for the clients, is actually to help them notice how those little steps are getting them closer to the big conceptual goal. And this is actually incredibly powerful for places where there's uncertainty about what's actually going to happen. Like not everything's in your control. Like gallery owners have to like have a way for you to get there, and they have to say yes, and that and not every gallery owner is going to say your stuff is my stuff. And one of the things that I find so I go into organizations as an agile coach, and I help companies do roadmap planning for things where they're building things that they don't actually know what the market's for. They know it's going to change over time. The tech is rapidly happening. There's all this uncertainty. And what we're trying to teach them is you have to define your goal abstractly enough that you have multiple ways that you can actually succeed. And so a goal that is as
Yeah.
abstract as I want my artwork in galleries is actually much more achievable than I want my artwork in that gallery.
Yeah, that's true.
I'm thinking about this abstract goal and sort of like, how do we help our clients? One of the concrete things that I will ask my clients in end of sessions, okay, what's the first step? We've got the conceptual thing. What's the first step? And then I will often ask them, what step is before that? What step is before that? Until they finally go, there isn't anything, but it may be as small as, somebody's working on academic paper. I open the paper that I need to read next and take notes on. I open that on my computer. And sometimes we'll do it in the session, so it's open and ready to go. The other piece of it is, like, oftentimes just doing a couple of those steps and leaving the rest to develop, like Kate's talking about. I've had occasions where we've like developed a whole plan. And then what happens is the client, and this happens to me too, actually, if I do this, gets overwhelmed with this whole long list of concrete steps, right? At which point we go into avoidance, we go into procrastination, we go into shutdown, and none of it gets done. So there's something to not having a whole roadmap, because if I just focus on the now, what's the step now? What's the step now? What's the step now? Right? That serves my ADHD brain and also doesn't throw me into overwhelm of like, oh my gosh, there's all this stuff to do. I can't take it. I'm out.
Yeah. The right sizing the goal is so important because for some people, it actually needs to be really small. Like I'm going to celebrate a very small step forward.
Celebrating.
And I'm a big believer in that, especially because for me, a sort of moderately reasonable, achievable goal, like if that SMART goal ever has like reasonable, if that's the R is the ever thing, like I'm bored already. I set that goal and I'm already demotivated.
That's right. That's right.
And it has to be almost impossible for me to get excited. I have to describe my goal in a way that is so big that my chances of achieving it are not actually great, but we're achieving it 3/4 will accomplish something cool. And so right sizing the goal for people's motivation is really important as well.
As her business partner, I can attest to this. Kate only likes the skyscraper goals. And those are like too far for me to like get behind. It's just not motivating for me. So then we also look at like what's in the next quarter, what's in the next year. And that helps me stay more in the now. Right.
There is a real balance between overwhelm and boredom, and between step by step. I realize that I can't do step by step, and I do bounce between, and so I have to have 2 or 3 goals on the go so that I can bounce between them. And if I have to do it step by step, then I'm already bored, really, because and if I do have goals that I do have to do step by step, then I have to do the timer and all these other things to really kind of screw my feet to the ground, and I can't move away and do them and things. I have.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry. No, I just this is going to change the subject slightly. So I'm just wondering.
One last thing about what you just said. Step by step is linear, right? I don't know many neurodivergent folks who are linear thinkers. We are divergent thinkers. We are web thinkers, right? So it totally makes sense that step by step doesn't work because our brains don't work that way. So,
that's right.
I'm curious about what the next.
The other question I have is comes back to the visualization and comes back to, and I'm curious about the role of metaphor. My experience is that I don't only coach people, neurodivergent people, I just coach whoever comes along, really. And some of those people know they're neurodivergent. Other people don't, but seem to me to be. Oh, I've forgotten what I was going to say now. Typical. Oh yeah, the role of metaphor. And I find that with neurodivergent people, I find that that metaphor really works well. And for me, I can work in metaphor. I love working in metaphor, even though I don't have that sense of visualization. And I'm curious about what you both feel, what you both feel about metaphor and how that plays into goals. And
You want to try first, or you want me to take it?
I'm curious where you would take it first, and then I have all sorts of other things that.
I think this kind of goes to the way our brains work again, because those are the conceptual thinkers who are a lot of neurodivergent folks who think in metaphor. It's like, I'm not sure I know how to not think in metaphor, but I could probably do it if really called upon to meet my client where they are. So I think we use metaphor a lot, but the thing that's coming to my mind, Kate, is did a fishbowl coaching last summer where I coached Kate for like 20 minutes. It was an unbelievable experience. And she's usually my coach, so it was really interesting. And what I remember about it, I don't know that we fully talked about this, but we were working in metaphor. The whole thing was metaphor after the first like 2 minutes. It was just full of metaphor and working with it. And the thing that was really interesting to me was I had visuals of everything we were talking about in my head, like the way that my part of evolving what we were doing was based on the visuals that I had in my head. And at the same time, I was very aware she did not have visuals in her head. And yet it didn't matter. Like she followed me and I followed her, no problem, even though the inner workings of it were not going to be the same. And I have meant to ask her about it for about 9 months now. So I'm really curious. So in that way, like metaphors are often visuals for me, but not always. And it sounds like you know, like you're saying, you work in metaphor, Kate works in metaphor. They don't have to be, right? So, I'm really curious how you experience that or other things.
Yeah. I mean, the interesting thing for me about that particular experience, which is quite typical of when I get coached and metaphor comes up, is that metaphor gives me access to complexity. So metaphor and poetry give me access to seeing the whole system as a whole, with a sort of the gestalt of it, the wholeness of it, which gives me a more complete sense of what it is that I'm trying to do. And we were doing life purpose work in that particular coaching session. And I came up with my life purpose is Nova Scotia. And that was a perfectly, like, I was so ecstatic with that as an answer. And actually, I realized I'd been going through this process of literally exploring whether I wanted to move to Nova Scotia, and that actually it was the metaphor that I wanted in my life and not the literalness, which was really sort of fascinating. But once I realized that I had that, then in order to remember it and embody it, and sort of, I needed a picture that was literally a picture of Nova Scotia on my wall for a while. In fact, it used to be right back there, but it's gone now. And so like there was a way of, I was actually sort of exploring something literal. The coaching took me to the metaphor. I then needed a literal representation of the metaphor to help me keep it in mind. So there's a complex play in there for me. One of the things that I find interesting, and I see this in my autistic clients as well as my Aphantasia clients, and it absolutely resonates with me, is sometimes the metaphor is an intellectual framework.
That's right.
And so sometimes that's sort of how the ideas go together, functions like poetry and metaphor for me. And yeah, Tracy?
No, that's okay, great.
But that's really interesting, because I have so many sort of autistic clients and friends and people who are like, we're very literal and we need this sort of very literal, and sort of we have these precise understandings of the words. And actually the level of precision about the vocabulary is actually, this is the piece of complexity that is captured in this word for me. And this word is actually a very precise metaphor for this entire realm of complexity
Right.
in a lot of places. And so it's this very strange definition of literal.
That's interesting.
I think it bears just saying. I find the metaphor to be much more powerful when it is the client bringing the metaphor and I'm working in their metaphor. I don't often offer my own metaphors, even though I may have them occur to me.
Oh,
And
for
I've been
sure.
working within them in my head. And sometimes I might offer it. If I've got enough rapport with the client and if, we've been in this for a while, but the metaphor we're talking about most often the client brings, and then I will work in that. They'll take that and we'll scamper off together into the sunset. So I just,
For sure.
Put that foundation in because I think we were all assuming it, but it bears stating.
For sure. Because I mean, everyone has their own symbolic, what's symbolic system. And I work with a lot of clean language questions. I don't know if you know about clean language. It's a system that works with symbolic modeling in the mind, initiated by a guy called David Grove, and he asks. There are only half a dozen questions, and it's all about working with the metaphors that the person comes up with, and then you only ever use their words and ask these questions. So you never ever you try not to. Once people get into the metaphor, you try and keep them there, as it were, or you don't interrupt the metaphor by asking, and I use the questions. I'm not trained in it, but I use the questions, and I find them really, really, very, very powerful. And for the clients that I use it with, and some of the clients, I use it again and again, and I'll say, shall we try some clean language? And they go, oh yeah, because it's this opportunity to really play with the ideas and play with the concepts, and then what I feel like, first of all, it stops me from it keeps me out of it completely, but then it also allows them to go to places they wouldn't have otherwise gone to. And then when we bring it back to what they wanted to talk about, they're looking at it from somewhere else. And that's always very, very exciting. Looking at it, whatever, not necessarily with pictures, but observing it, conceptualizing it from somewhere else. And
sounds very coachy.
It is it's super coachy. I mean, it's super coachy. Yeah. I mean, it started out as a therapy system, but it's now also used in coaching and various other things. But
yeah, one of the things that it's reminding me of is that, well, there's sort of two places that it's reminding me of. One is if a client is having difficulty articulating something and is having difficulty finding their own metaphor, I might actually say, the metaphor I might use is, and I might throw a metaphor in and say, does that capture it? What is it missing? And sort of use it as a bounce off to see if it gets them to somewhere different. So, like, if I throw out it reminds me of Winnie the Pooh, and they're like, no, but it's more like Tigger. Like, then we're off to the races. And then we can actually sort of launch into their metaphor. So sometimes I will offer a metaphor of mine, but only as a, like, if you're having difficulty coming up with a metaphor and it seems like it might be useful. The other is that early in my training, one of the things that I was taught as a way of exploring a variety of perspectives that you might want to take onto the situation is actually to find a bunch of different things using different sensory capacities as metaphors, just to explore what different perspectives got unlocked by, if you're taking the perspective of the color blue, what does it show you about this issue? Or if you take the position of, like, stuffed bear, what does that give you? And so I think that there's this enormous richness that can come when we get into the nonlinear and the more ambiguous symbolic stuff.
Thing I'm noticing about what Kate's saying, there's also a coach like tenant, right? She's offering these things without being attached to them.
Yeah.
If she were attached to her metaphor, this would be a no-go, right? No, it's more like Winnie the Pooh because, like, no, right? She's saying, it's like Winnie the Pooh to me. No, it's more like Tigger. Okay, we go with Tigger, right? Also, the last thing you said, Kate, made me wonder what the octopus perspective is.
What do the octopus have?
Everything we do is like, I really want to ask the octopus.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's Heidi.
Good question. Let's see what else I wrote down. Those are mostly the questions I had really around, I guess it was really the idea, it was mostly just around the idea of what does it mean to visualize a goal, and what you were saying about it being only a few in advance and let it unfold, I think is very much how I am in my coaching sessions with people, and also how I am generally in life, really. But I realize that there's and I always think of it like making a piece of artwork, the artwork tells you what to do, right? You follow it, right? And coaching's a bit like that. You follow your client. They tell you where to go, really. And so goal setting always seems a bit of an anathema to me in the context of that, except in relation to moving in a direction to see what unfolds. And the other side of that, though, is you're never clear where you're going, and you're never clear if you're going in the right direction. And I know for myself, I've gone down many, many rabbit holes, which I'm sure many ADHD people, like you were saying, Kate, like you have to try things out and you go down all sorts of different ways that don't feel right. So there's that balance in between in both in the coaching session. Are we going in one of a number of different directions because that's what's coming up for the client, and how do we contain that or hold that in a way so that it becomes productive? And that's true of generally of goals too, I guess. That's what's coming to mind. I don't know what you guys think.
What's coming to my mind here is that part of the reason for setting goals is to get to the end of your life and feel like your life was success, like I succeeded in life. And in the big picture, like that's what goals are for. So the other part of it is like to be enjoying your life as it's unfolding now. And you don't need to be able to visualize the future to be able to enjoy the present. And so the more interesting one to me is like, how do you get to the end of your life without ever having visualized a final state that you were trying to get to and feel good about where you did get to? And I think that's a place where values and purpose work is very, very powerful, because if you, in your moment, as you're deciding, how am I going to deal with the present and navigate the present going forward, if you're using values and purpose as a decision-making criteria as you're making those decisions, then from any moment in time, you can look back and say, I've been moving forward towards these values and this purpose. And so there's a sense of that you're sort of skipping over the questions of regret about, like, was I valuing the right things that we hear about all the time about people at the end of life being like, I didn't stop and smell the roses enough. I didn't pay enough attention to my family. I didn't value the right things. If you do the work on what is that I value and what is it that I want, what kind of impact do I want to have on the world, and you start using that as a day-to-day decision maker, it sort of skips that I need to have a concrete vision of what it's going to look like. And it kind of skips and I need to complete this project for it to be a success.
That's right. Yeah, that's a good point.
I want to say one thing about all of this, because we've been talking in the way that we usually think, and it sounds like we have common thinking in this Zoom room, in terms of goals, right? And like we keep saying, what really matters is how does the client want to move their goals.
That's right.
So we've been talking about it in terms of like, if you're ADHD and Aphantasia, here are some of the things that might come up. And also, when I do executive coaching or some of the leadership coaching that I do, that the folks are not necessarily neurodivergent, but still being neurodiversity inclusive, of course. Like part of that is not assuming these things about setting their goals, right? Because for some people that can be incredibly disconcerting. Like they need the concrete, they want the SMART goal. That doesn't mean we can't also change the awareness, and maybe the SMART goal shifts, but like what the client needs is how I'm going to work with them. I'm going to meet them where they are in terms of like that. So it goes back to what we constantly say about being neurodiversity inclusive, which is just not making assumptions in the first place.
That's right.
One way, another, or another way, or another way, or another way. Like get to know your client. What do they need? What makes them like more likely to succeed and try out these changes? If it's a SMART goal, then we're going to do SMART goals.
Yeah.
So it happens that most of my clientele, that's not their thing.
Yeah. But what do you want, and how will you know that you've got it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's where, you know, when you first meet your client, kind of really important to ask a lot of questions that might bring out some of those things about how they approach things, what's important to them, and how they approach things. Yeah, that kind of thing, because it really, really helps to round out that picture, doesn't it, when you first meet them, so that you can be, as you're saying, inclusive and not make any assumptions. And have a curiosity.
Absolutely.
Because I find I'm just super curious. I just kind of like, who are you and how do you think, right? And what excites you, and you know, what are the quirkinesses of the way you approach the world? I mean, that's the exciting thing about meeting a new client, or any, you know, or working with our clients. It's like, wow, really? Well, that's really interesting. You know, yeah.
Yeah, I'm always saying we have a fun job because of our curiosity, and I like the surprise that the clients bring and who they are. I'm taking a look at the time and realizing that we're coming up on our time together, but I want to make sure, like, what are we leaving on the table, Heidi, that we'd still like to touch on, or any part of this that we need to delve into a little bit more before we?
No, I'm good. I'm good. It's been super interesting. Super interesting, and loved your ideas and your thoughts about the whole range of things, and suggestions too. I think, you know, very, very valid, very useful. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing your insightful questions and for bringing your insightful self, and being taking this time, because the most fun about this is you made us think and you made us reflect on things we maybe don't all the time. And that, just like we were talking about, that's fun with our clients. That's fun with all the people we encounter. So we really appreciate your time and energy being here with us and being curious about these pieces.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And thank you for such a specific piece of the coaching piece, and to like do a deep dive into this question of goals. Super fun. So thank you very much.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank you.
We'll see you soon.
Yeah.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.